Mira stood at the edge of the narrow forest path holding a small suitcase in her hand. The air around her was calm but filled with the smell of pine trees and damp earth. Before her stood the old cabin that her grandpa had once loved so much. Its wooden walls were dark from years of rain and sunlight. The roof had moss growing on it and the windows looked foggy from dust and age. It had been 10 long years since Mira last came here. Her grandpa had passed away a few months ago, leaving the cabin to her in his will. When Mira read his letter, she could almost hear his voice asking her to take care of the place. He had written that the cabin still had something special waiting for her. At first she thought he was just being poetic because he always spoke in riddles. But now as she looked at the quiet structure standing alone among tall trees, she felt that maybe there was more to it. Mira walked slowly up the small steps to the porch. Each step made a soft creak under her shoes. The wooden door looked the same as before, with its brass handle slightly rusted. She took a deep breath, turned the handle, and pushed the door open. A cool breath of stale air touched her face. Inside, the cabin was covered in layers of dust. The furniture looked just as it had been left years ago. There was her grandpa's rocking chair near the fireplace, a small table with an old clock and shelves full of jars and books. She walked across the room, running her fingers along the dusty table. It felt like touching a memory. The clock had stopped ticking long ago, but it still stood proudly as if waiting for someone to wind it again. Mira smiled a little, remembering how her grandpa used to tell her bedtime stories here by the fire. She could almost hear his calm voice and see his warm smile. She opened the windows to let in fresh air. The sunlight entered the room in long golden lines, making the dust in the air sparkle. For a moment it looked like tiny stars floating around her. She decided to start cleaning. She took an old broom from behind the door and began to sweep the floor. The wood creaked beneath her every step. As she moved the rug in the center of the room, she noticed something strange beneath it. There were small carvings on the floor, patterns made of triangles, circles, and lines that formed an odd design. Mira bent down to look closer. The carvings looked old but carefully made, as if someone had spent hours shaping them. She wondered if her grandpa had made them, or if they were already there when he bought the place. She traced one of the lines with her finger and felt the roughness of the wood. After sweeping and dusting for almost an hour, Mira sat down on the rocking chair. It groaned a little as she leaned back. She felt tired but peaceful. The sound of birds outside mixed with the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The forest seemed alive around her. She looked at the old photographs on the wall. There was one of her grandpa holding her hand when she was a child, both smiling in front of the cabin. She smiled back at the photo and whispered, "I am here, Grandpa. I am keeping it safe." On the shelf near the fireplace, Mira noticed a wooden box she had never seen before. It was small and covered in dust like everything else, but it had a certain charm. The box had her grandpa's initials carved faintly on the lid. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. She tried to open it, but it was locked. The lock was small, made of brass and slightly tarnished. She looked around for a key but could not find one. Her curiosity grew stronger. She searched through drawers under the bed, behind old books, and even in the small cupboard near the kitchen corner. She found old coins, a torn map, some nails, and an old photo of her grandpa with 2 other men she did not recognize, but no key. When she came back to the table, the box seemed to be waiting for her. She sat down, placed it in front of her, and studied it closely. The carvings on the box were similar to the ones she had seen under the rug. It gave her a strange feeling, as if the box and the cabin shared a secret. She pressed her fingers around its edges, hoping to find a hidden switch or loose spot. Just when she was about to give up, her thumb touched a small uneven line near the bottom corner. It clicked softly. The lid lifted slightly. Mira's heart beat faster. Inside the box was a folded piece of parchment tied with an old string. Beneath it was a small round object wrapped in cloth. She untied the string and opened the parchment carefully. It was filled with her grandpa's handwriting. The ink was faded but still readable. At the top were the words, "For Mira, when the time is right." Her eyes widened as she began to read. The letter said that the cabin was built over an old foundation that had belonged to her great-grandfather, a man who had worked with maps and strange symbols. He had once claimed that the land held something ancient and powerful, though no one believed him. Her grandpa wrote that during his life he had found hints of what his father spoke of, but never the full truth. He believed the carvings on the floor and the box were clues left behind. He wrote that if Mira ever returned, she should trust her instincts and follow the signs hidden inside the cabin. Mira sat still for a long moment. Her grandpa was not a man who believed in fantasy. He was practical and calm. If he had written something like this, it meant he truly believed it. She looked again at the small round object in the box. She unwrapped it and found an old compass. It was unlike any she had seen before. The needle did not point north but spun slowly before settling toward the wall behind the fireplace. She stood up, holding the compass in her hand. It pointed firmly in one direction, as if something was calling from that spot. She knelt beside the fireplace and looked closely at the stones. One of them had a faint symbol carved into it that matched the markings on the floor. She touched the stone. It moved slightly as if it were loose. Her heart pounded. She pulled it gently and behind it found a small hollow space. Inside the space was a metal box covered in dust and cobwebs. Mira took the metal box out and placed it on the table beside the wooden one. Her hands trembled slightly. The metal box had no lock, only a latch. She hesitated for a second before opening it. Inside were several old papers, photographs, and what looked like a small notebook bound in leather. The pages were yellow and fragile. She turned the first page and saw her great-grandfather's name written neatly across the top. Before she could read more, a sudden gust of wind blew through the open window, making the candle flame flicker wildly. The compass on the table began to spin again. The air in the cabin felt different, heavier, as if something unseen had awakened. Mira looked around, her heart thudding with both fear and wonder. She whispered softly, "Grandpa, what did you leave behind for me?" Mira stared at the small metal box on the table. The candle beside it burned softly, casting a warm light that made the shadows move along the wooden walls. Her heart was still racing from what she had just found. The leather notebook inside the box seemed very old. Its corners were torn, and the pages looked like they could crumble if handled too roughly. She sat down carefully and opened it again. The first page had her great-grandfather's name, written in thick black ink. Below it were the words, "Research of the Lost Light." Mira frowned. She had never heard of anything called the Lost Light before. She began to read slowly, trying to understand the faded writing. Her great-grandfather wrote about a strange light he had seen deep in the forest many years ago. He believed it was not a normal light, but something that came from underground. He had written that it appeared only to certain people, and that it could show hidden truths. As Mira read further, she found drawings and maps sketched with great care. Some showed the forest surrounding the cabin. Others showed strange shapes that looked like symbols. One page caught her attention because it had the same circle and triangle design that she had seen carved under the rug. Her great-grandfather had drawn arrows around it and written a note beside it saying, "Entrance near the roots of the old pine." Mira's eyes lifted from the page to the window. The forest outside looked calm, but the words "old pine" stayed in her mind. There were many pine trees around the cabin, but she remembered one in particular. It stood taller and wider than the rest and was close to the small stream behind the house. She remembered playing near it as a child and how her grandpa always told her not to dig near its roots. Maybe now she knew why. She closed the notebook gently and looked again at the compass. Its needle was no longer spinning. It now pointed firmly toward the back window that faced the forest where the old pine tree stood. Mira felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if the compass was guiding her. She took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight from her bag, and stepped outside. The night air was cool, and the forest was alive with soft sounds of insects and rustling leaves. The moonlight filtered through the branches, creating pale patches on the ground. Mira followed the compass through the trees until she reached the large pine tree. It looked even older than she remembered. Its roots spread wide across the ground, thick and twisted. She walked around it slowly, shining her light along the roots. After a few minutes, her beam of light caught something unusual. Between two large roots was a small wooden cover hidden under dried leaves. Mira brushed the leaves away and knelt down. The cover had the same carved pattern of triangles and circles. She touched it gently and the wood felt cold, almost like metal. She tried lifting it, but it did not move. She pushed harder, and finally, with a soft crack, the cover slid open just enough for her to see darkness below. There was a narrow opening leading down like a short tunnel. Mira hesitated. It felt strange to go into a place hidden for so long, but her curiosity was stronger. She fetched a small lantern from the cabin, lit it, and returned to the spot. Holding the lantern carefully, she lowered herself through the opening. The air inside was cool and smelled of earth and old wood. The passage was narrow, but she managed to move through it slowly until she reached a small chamber below. The space looked like a cellar, but it was not made like the rest of the cabin. The walls were smooth stone, and the air was thick with the scent of time. On one side stood an old table covered with dust. On it lay several glass jars, a metal cup, and some papers that had turned yellow with age. Mira set her lantern on the table and began to look around. There were carvings on the walls, similar to the ones on the floor above, but larger and more detailed. The same circle and triangle pattern appeared again, but this time there was something new inside the design. It looked like a small flame drawn in the center. Mira traced the shape with her hand and whispered, "Lost light." As she turned, she noticed another wooden box resting on a shelf carved into the wall. It was smaller than the others but had a faint glow coming from a crack in its lid. Mira's breath caught in her throat. She reached out and picked it up. The glow pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. She opened the lid slowly. Inside was a crystal the size of her palm, shining softly with a white light that moved like liquid. It was beautiful and strange at the same time. Mira stared at it for a long moment. The light seemed to shift when she moved it, almost like it was alive. She could feel a faint warmth in her hand. The crystal's glow reflected off the stone walls, filling the small chamber with a soft radiance. She remembered her great-grandfather's words from the notebook about a light that revealed hidden truths. She wondered if this was what he had found all those years ago. She placed the crystal carefully back into the box and looked around for anything else. Near the table, she found a metal container sealed with wax. She opened it and found old papers rolled inside. The writing was faded, but she could make out parts of it. It spoke of a discovery that could change the way people saw the world. It mentioned that the light could show things that were invisible to the human eye, and that it had to be protected from those who might misuse it. Mira began to feel a mix of wonder and confusion. She wanted to know more, but many of the papers were too damaged to read. She gathered what she could, placed them in a small bag, and climbed back up through the passage into the night. The forest felt quieter now, almost watchful. She closed the wooden cover and covered it again with leaves. When she returned to the cabin, the candle had burned low. She sat by the fireplace and placed the glowing crystal on the table. The light from it filled the room with a peaceful shine. For the first time since she arrived, the cabin did not feel lonely. It felt alive, as if her grandpa's presence was still there. She looked again at his picture on the wall and smiled softly. She opened the notebook again and flipped through the pages. Near the end, she found a small note written in her grandpa's handwriting, different from the earlier pages. It said, "If you found the light, it means you are ready. Keep it safe. It belongs to those who protect, not those who destroy." Mira read it twice, her chest tightening with emotion. She realized her grandpa had known about the crystal all along. The wind outside grew stronger, and the wooden walls creaked softly. The flame of the candle flickered, and the compass on the table began to move again. The needle now pointed toward the window where the forest lay in darkness. Mira looked at the light in front of her, then at the direction the compass was showing. She felt as if the forest was calling her again. She closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and whispered, "I will keep it safe, Grandpa." The crystal's light shimmered softly in reply, and the cabin filled with calm silence. Yet, deep in her heart, Mira knew that this was not the end of her discovery. It was only the beginning. Mira woke up early the next morning to the sound of birds outside the cabin. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then her eyes fell on the glowing crystal resting on the table beside her bed. Its soft white light was still shining faintly even after the candle had burned out. Everything that had happened the night before rushed back into her mind. She sat up and stared at the crystal. It looked calm and harmless, yet she could feel something powerful about it. Her grandpa's words from the note echoed in her head, telling her to protect it. She touched the crystal gently and a soft warmth spread through her fingers. It was not hot, only comforting, almost like it was alive and could feel her presence. After a simple breakfast, Mira sat down near the window with the notebook open in her lap. The sunlight coming through the trees fell on the pages, making the faded writing easier to read. She studied the maps her great-grandfather had drawn. One map showed a trail leading deeper into the forest beyond the stream. Next to it, a line of words read, "The light belongs to the heart of the woods." Mira looked out toward the forest. The compass still pointed in the same direction it had last night, toward the trees beyond the cabin. She wondered if the forest was somehow connected to the light. Maybe her grandpa and great-grandfather had tried to find the source but never completed their search. She decided that she had to continue it. She packed her bag with the compass, the notebook, some water, and the crystal wrapped safely in a cloth. Before leaving, she touched the frame of her grandpa's picture and whispered, "I will take care of it, just like you wanted." Then she stepped outside. The forest was quiet except for the sound of leaves moving gently in the wind. Mira followed the compass, walking past the old pine tree and the stream. The further she went, the denser the trees became. Shafts of sunlight cut through the branches and the air felt cooler and heavier. Every sound seemed sharper, from the distant call of a bird to the crunch of leaves under her shoes. After walking for nearly an hour, Mira reached a part of the forest she had never seen before. The ground was covered with soft moss, and there were strange stones arranged in a rough circle. She stopped in front of them and opened the notebook to compare with the drawing. The pattern matched perfectly. Her great-grandfather had marked this place as an important point. At the center of the circle was a flat rock with carvings that looked like the same symbols from the cabin floor. Mira knelt down and brushed away the dirt covering it. The carvings were deep and precise. She placed the compass on the rock, and its needle began to spin slowly before stopping, pointing straight down. Her heart started to beat faster. The crystal in her bag began to glow faintly through the cloth. She unwrapped it and placed it in the middle of the carved pattern. The moment she did, the carvings on the rock began to shine with the same white light. A soft humming sound filled the air. Mira stepped back, frightened but also amazed. The light grew brighter, and then the rock started to move, lowering itself into the ground and revealing a stairway made of stone leading down into darkness. Mira hesitated. Her instincts told her to be careful, but curiosity pushed her forward. She picked up the lantern from her bag and lit it. Holding it in one hand and the crystal in the other, she started walking down the steps. The air grew cooler as she went deeper. The sound of the forest faded behind her, replaced by the faint echo of her footsteps. The stairway led to a wide underground chamber. Its walls were covered with symbols and drawings of trees, stars, and circles of light. In the middle of the chamber stood a large stone pedestal. On it was a circular metal plate that looked ancient. As Mira stepped closer, the crystal in her hand began to pulse with light again. She placed the crystal on the plate. The symbols on the wall started to glow one by one until the entire chamber was filled with soft white light. Mira watched in wonder as the air around her shimmered. The light formed shapes almost like moving pictures. She saw an image of her great-grandfather standing in the same chamber holding the crystal. His expression was calm and he seemed to be speaking, though she could not hear the words. The image faded, replaced by another of her grandpa sealing the passage and writing in his notebook. Mira realized that what she was seeing were memories, not real people. The crystal was showing her what had happened in the past. She watched as her grandpa hid the first box in the cabin and placed a letter inside it for her. Then the light shifted again, showing a glowing root running deep under the forest. It pulsed like a living thing. Mira understood then that the lost light was not just the crystal, it was something larger, something that lived beneath the forest itself. When the images faded, the chamber went silent again. The glow from the crystal dimmed, leaving only the faint light from her lantern. Mira stood there for a long time, trying to understand what she had seen. Her grandpa and great-grandfather had protected this secret for years. Now it was her turn. She picked up the crystal and placed it back in her bag. Before leaving, she noticed a small opening on the far side of the chamber. She walked closer and found another passage leading deeper underground. The air that came from it was cool and smelled of fresh earth and something metallic. She wanted to explore it, but her lantern flame flickered weakly. She decided to come back later when she had more light and tools. Mira climbed the stairs back to the surface. The moment she stepped out, the rock slid back into place, hiding the entrance completely. The forest was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. She felt both amazed and overwhelmed. The sunlight now looked brighter, and the wind seemed to whisper around her. She walked back toward the cabin, her mind full of thoughts. When she reached home, she placed the crystal on the table again and opened the notebook to the last page. She noticed something she had not seen before. Written faintly at the bottom were the words, "The forest remembers those who listen." She smiled softly and closed the book. That night, Mira sat by the window watching the forest. The crystal's glow filled the room with gentle light. She felt that her grandpa's spirit was near, proud of her for following the clues. But deep inside, she knew her journey was not over. The underground passage still waited for her, and the forest still held secrets that had yet to be revealed. As she looked out at the dark trees, a faint shimmer moved between the trunks. It looked like a flicker of the same white light she had seen underground. It moved slowly, almost calling her. Mira felt the pull of curiosity again. She whispered quietly, "Tomorrow I will find out what you are." Then she turned off the lamp and the cabin fell silent under the watch of the glowing crystal. Mira woke before sunrise. The air inside the cabin was cool and still. The forest outside was covered in a thin mist that made the trees look like tall shadows. The glowing crystal on the table had dimmed, but it still gave off a soft white light. Mira rubbed her eyes and stared at it, feeling both comfort and curiosity. She knew she could not stop now. There was more to discover, and she had to understand what her grandpa had protected for so long. After breakfast, she packed her bag again with the compass, lantern, notebook, and the crystal wrapped carefully in cloth. She also carried a small rope, a flashlight, and a piece of chalk in case she needed to mark her way. Before leaving, she touched her grandpa's photo on the wall and said quietly, "I'm going to finish what you started." The forest was quiet when she stepped outside. The morning light fell through the trees in thin beams, lighting small patches of the path. The mist moved slowly across the ground as she walked. The compass needle pointed in the same direction it had the day before, leading her toward the deeper part of the woods. She followed the trail past the old pine tree and beyond the stream. The ground here was damp and the air smelled stronger, full of earth and moss. Birds watched her from high branches, their eyes bright in the morning light. After walking for some time, she reached the stone circle again. The carvings on the rock were faintly visible under the moss, but the place felt different now. The forest around it was silent, almost listening. Mira placed the crystal on the rock again. Its light spread slowly until the carvings glowed. The stone lowered once more, revealing the stairway. She took a deep breath and started to climb down, the lantern lighting her way. The familiar cold air greeted her as she entered the underground chamber. The symbols on the walls were faint now, but still visible in the lantern's glow. She looked around carefully. The stone pedestal stood in the center as before, but this time she did not place the crystal on it. Instead, she walked to the far end where the small passage waited. The opening was narrow and dark. The air that came from it was cooler than before. Mira tied one end of the rope to a stone and held the other end in her hand. Then she took the lantern and stepped inside. The tunnel was rough and uneven. The walls were made of stone, damp with water that dripped slowly from above. The ground sloped downward. Mira moved carefully, marking the walls with chalk as she went. After walking for several minutes, she noticed faint carvings again, but these were different. They looked newer and were shaped like arrows pointing forward. She followed the arrows, and soon the passage widened into another chamber. This one was smaller but brighter. A faint blue glow came from the walls themselves, as if the stones had light trapped inside them. In the center was a small stone table, and on it lay a book made of thick paper bound with metal rings. Mira placed her lantern down and opened the book. The pages were filled with drawings and notes written in her grandpa's handwriting. Her chest tightened as she read. He had been here. The notes explained that this underground network was built by her great-grandfather and his team many decades ago. They believed the light beneath the forest was a living energy that connected everything. Her grandpa had continued the research in secret, protecting it from people who wanted to use it for greed. As Mira turned the pages, one sketch caught her attention. It showed a map of the underground tunnels with a large circle marked Heart of the Light. The path to it started from this chamber. Next to the circle, her grandpa had written, "Only one who carries the crystal may enter." Mira looked around the room. On the far side there was another door made of stone. In the center of the door was a small circular hole that matched the shape of the crystal. She took the crystal from her bag and held it near the hole. It began to glow brighter, filling the chamber with white light. When she placed it into the hole, the stone door moved slowly, sliding open with a deep sound. Beyond the door was a large cavern that took her breath away. The ceiling was high, and the air shimmered faintly as if filled with invisible energy. In the middle of the cavern was a pool of clear water that glowed with the same white light as the crystal. The water's surface rippled gently, though there was no wind. Mira stepped closer, her eyes wide with wonder. She knelt beside the pool and touched the water. It was warm and felt smooth like silk. The moment her fingers touched it, the crystal in the door pulsed brightly. Light spread across the surface of the water, and for a second she saw images forming again. This time she saw herself as a child playing near the cabin with her grandpa. He was laughing, his eyes kind and full of love. Then the image changed to show her great-grandfather writing in his notebook beside the same pool. He looked tired but peaceful. The images faded, leaving only the glowing water. Mira's eyes filled with tears. She realized this light was not just some strange power. It was a memory, a life force that held the essence of her family and maybe of the forest itself. She understood now why her grandpa had kept it hidden. Something so pure could easily be lost or harmed if people tried to control it. She stayed there for a while, listening to the soft sound of the water. The light around her made her feel calm, as if the forest itself was breathing quietly. When she finally stood up, she noticed something carved into the stone near the edge of the pool. It was a message written in her grandpa's handwriting. It said, "If you have found this place, you are part of its story now. Protect it as it has protected us." Mira smiled sadly. She touched the carving and whispered, "I will." Then she picked up the crystal from the door. As she did, the stone slid back, sealing the cavern once again. The light from the pool faded until only the faint glow of the crystal remained. She made her way back through the tunnel, following her chalk marks until she reached the first chamber. Climbing the stairs, she emerged into the open forest. The sunlight hit her face, warm and bright. She felt different now, lighter and stronger, as if the forest had accepted her. Back at the cabin, she placed the crystal on the table again. It glowed softly, filling the room with gentle light. Mira opened her grandpa's notebook and wrote her own message on the last page. She wrote, "The heart of the light still lives beneath the forest. I will protect it just as you did." As evening came, the forest outside turned golden. Mira sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the trees sway in the breeze. The cabin felt peaceful, full of life. She could almost feel her grandpa's presence beside her, smiling with pride. But then, just as the sun began to set, Mira noticed something strange. The compass on the table started to move again. The needle spun faster than before, then stopped, pointing not toward the forest this time, but toward the mountain in the distance. Mira's heart skipped a beat. She realized the story was not finished. There was still more to uncover, and her family's secret might be bigger than she had ever imagined. Mira could not sleep that night. The compass on the table kept pointing toward the distant mountain beyond the forest. Its needle pulsed slightly as if urging her to follow. She held the crystal carefully in her hands, feeling its soft warmth. She remembered her grandpa's words. The light belonged to those who protect, and she understood now that protecting it meant learning more, discovering its full story. At first light, Mira packed a small bag. She took the compass, the crystal wrapped safely, the notebook, and some food and water. She left the cabin tidy, closing the windows and locking the door. As she stepped into the morning air, the forest felt alive around her. The trees seemed taller, their leaves glistening with dew. Birds flew overhead, and even the wind seemed to guide her steps. Following the compass, Mira walked through the forest for hours. She crossed the stream where she had played as a child, climbed over fallen logs, and carefully stepped around moss-covered rocks. The sunlight grew stronger and the forest gradually thinned, revealing a clear path toward the mountain. Each step made her heart beat faster. She felt excitement and a little fear, but also the certainty that she was on the right path. As she approached the mountain base, the terrain became steeper. Rocks and small cliffs made the climb challenging, but the compass never wavered. The needle pointed steadily toward a small cave opening halfway up the slope. Mira paused for a moment to catch her breath. The cave's entrance was dark and a faint, cool breeze came from inside. She lit her lantern and stepped carefully into the shadowy space. The cave was narrow at first, but it soon opened into a wide chamber. Its walls glistened with mineral deposits that reflected the light of her lantern. In the center was a stone pedestal, larger than any she had seen before. The crystal in her hand pulsed softly as she approached. She placed it on the pedestal. Instantly, the cave filled with a soft white glow. The light was stronger than anything she had ever seen, and it illuminated symbols etched into the walls and ceiling. Mira walked slowly around the pedestal, examining the carvings. They told a story, one that spanned generations. Her great-grandfather had discovered this place long ago. He had learned that the mountain held the source of the lost light, an energy that connected the forest, the land, and all living things. Her grandpa had continued the work, studying and protecting the light. Now it was her turn. As she stood there, the crystal began to shine brighter, sending beams of light toward the carvings. The symbols seemed to move slightly, like they were alive. Mira realized the light was responding to her presence. She reached out and touched the wall. Instantly, an image appeared in the air. She saw her grandpa standing here as a young man, placing a smaller crystal on the pedestal. Then she saw her great-grandfather teaching him, pointing toward the walls and drawing the symbols carefully. The images faded, leaving Mira staring in awe at the glowing pedestal. She understood now that the lost light was not just a crystal or a hidden energy. It was a living memory, a force that held the wisdom and protection of her family. It had waited for someone who would respect it, someone who would keep it safe and pass it on to the next generation. Suddenly, a soft sound echoed through the cave. Mira turned and saw a faint shimmer along the far wall. It was a door hidden in the rock. The crystal pulsed brighter, as if encouraging her to go closer. She walked slowly and pressed her hand against the stone. The door moved silently, revealing a small chamber inside. Within the chamber were more crystals, smaller than the one she carried, each glowing with a soft light. On a table lay journals, tools, and notes. Mira recognized the handwriting as her grandpa's. He had documented everything, the history of the lost light, its power, and the ways to protect it. She carefully opened the first journal and began to read. The journals explained that the light had its own intelligence. It responded only to those with a pure heart, those who sought knowledge rather than power. It was a gift, but also a responsibility. Her grandpa had written instructions for how to care for it and how to use it to reveal truths without causing harm. Mira realized that the compass had always guided her to where she needed to go. The crystal had protected her, and the forest had whispered clues all along. She spent the day studying the journals and exploring the chamber. The crystals pulsed with light, each one showing visions of the past. She saw her grandpa as a child learning from his father. She saw herself as a young girl playing near the cabin. The light held their stories, their love for the land, and their respect for the forest. It was beautiful and powerful, yet gentle. When evening came, Mira carefully packed her notes and crystals. She left the small chamber as she had found it, sealing the hidden door with her own hands. The pedestal's glow dimmed but still remained faintly bright. She felt a sense of calm. She had seen the truth and understood her duty. The light was safe, and she was now its guardian. As she climbed down the mountain, the forest seemed to welcome her back. The wind rustled the leaves in a way that sounded like applause. The compass now pointed back toward the cabin. Mira smiled. She would return home, but she knew this was only the beginning of her role. The lost light would guide her, teach her, and always be a part of her life. Back at the cabin, Mira placed the crystal on the table again. Its soft glow filled the room with warmth. She lit a small fire in the fireplace and opened the notebooks. She began to write, documenting her journey, adding her own observations and discoveries. The cabin was quiet and peaceful, but Mira knew it was alive with the energy of the forest and her family. Days passed, and Mira continued to explore the forest carefully. She marked trails, observed the animals, and learned to listen to the subtle signs of the woods. The lost light guided her to places she could not see with her eyes alone. Each night she returned to the cabin, writing her findings in the journals her grandpa had left for her. She felt a connection to her family stronger than ever before, as if their spirits were walking beside her. One morning, Mira noticed the compass moving again. This time the needle pointed to a small clearing near the edge of the forest. She followed it, carrying the crystal carefully. When she reached the clearing, she found an old tree with a hollow trunk. Inside was another small crystal glowing faintly. She placed her crystal beside it, and together they created a gentle radiance that filled the clearing. Mira smiled. She understood that the lost light was not just in one place. It lived in many parts of the forest, connecting everything together. Mira returned to the cabin, her heart full of peace. She had discovered her grandpa's secrets, protected the lost light, and learned the true meaning of her family's legacy. The cabin, the forest, and the crystal were no longer just memories. They were her life, her responsibility, and her treasure. From that day on, Mira kept the cabin and the forest safe. She documented the secrets of the lost light, taught others to respect it, and followed the guidance of the compass and the crystals. She never felt alone because she knew her grandpa and great-grandfather were always with her, watching over the forest and the light. Mira understood that some treasures were not gold or jewels. Some treasures were knowledge, love, and the careful protection of something precious. The lost light was one of those treasures, and now it would shine for generations to come. As the sun set, Mira stood outside the cabin, looking at the forest. The crystal on the table glowed softly inside, casting a gentle light through the window. She smiled and whispered, "I will protect it, Grandpa. I will always protect it." The forest seemed to respond with a soft rustle of leaves, and Mira felt a deep peace. She had found her purpose, discovered the secret, and fulfilled her grandpa's wish. The story of the lost light would continue, guided by her hands, her heart, and her family's love.